Hello everybody, this is Dr. Kumar Bisrupur, Department of Education, Associate Professor, Karnataka State Akkamadu University, Vijaypura. Today we shall discuss about CTE 01, which is the course at IGNOU. In that, let us see who are the language learners. That is CTE 01. In that, first let us see who are the language learners. This is one of the course CT, the one of the course at IGNOU, Indira Gandhi National Open University, certificate in teaching English. The knowledge that societies have accumulated and which various adults have mastered needs to be passed on to the young. Children are not born with this knowledge. Most of it has to be passed on thought, the process of education in which this knowledge is packaged in the form of school subjects. And most school subjects have to be taught by teachers in the formal school, at least to begin with, and usually for many years. Language, especially the mother tongue, is a striking exception to this general rule. As already mentioned, children learn to speak their mother tongue long before they enter formal school. Also, many persons who have dropped out of school and even those who have never been to school at all are quite fluent users of the language of their particular communities. Of course, such people may not be able to read and write, but they have mastered most of the complex grammar and extended vocabulary and important aspects of organization and even style of the language they speak. The principle that emerges from these facts is that the learning of languages community, language community spoken in the community in which individuals live is a much wider process than what is prescribed and taught in school or colleges. Since there is no clearly inaudible agency outside the school that is doing any teaching of language, we must conclude that human learners of language have some special capacity to learn the language. So here, the very important is society plays a vital role in a language learning. And what is the central role of language in human society? That is we are very keen to know in this aspect. The use of language as the primary means of communication is one of the defining characteristics of the human species. Many animal species also use signs of various types to communicate or convey information. But these science systems are very simple and inflexible. They are very far removed from the complexity and versatility and creativity that goes with human or natural languages. The primary position of language in the life of mankind is highlighted by the expression talking animal, that is sometimes used to describe humans. This central role of communication through natural language in human social life is made possible by the fact that all human individuals are able to handle or operate the language of their societies. This is so obvious that we simply take it for granted. But it is useful to note that there is an important principle here. This applies to all normal human beings, only that they proportionally, that tiny proportion of the population of any country with major physiological handicaps, handicap means brain damage, mental retardation, deafness, and dumbness, remain unable to use language. The learning of the mother tongue or first language. If here the first language means we will take in a short for L1 is a slow and long drawn out uh, process. It is difficult to say when a person has fully mastered his or her language one. We have taken language means first language. L1 is the first language, and so has finished learning it. Further, many people learn more than one language. This is especially true of multilingual societies like ours, and with the modern communication breaking down national linguistic boundaries. So this is a very important aspect what we have to keep in mind during knowing the society and language learners. Now the thing is socialization, the learning of language and culture. The growth and development of the human child into an adolescent and later an adult involves two parallel and interlinked processes. One is physiological growth or maturation. This is supported mainly by nutrition and exercise and protection from physical harm. The second and more complex process is the physiological, that is very important, as well as psychological growth of the individual. This is an important aspect of social development. The process whereby the helpless infant gradually becomes an independent and actively participating member of his or her community. A functioning member of human society is an individual who is able to interact and communicate effectively with others, both directly with individuals and more indirectly with the community in general. This is made possible by the use of language. Thus, one major requirement that must be met as the child grows is the learning of the first language, that is L1. A member of society is also a person, an individual with unique combination of characteristics that make up his or her personality. Among these characteristics are personality traits, interests, abilities, and talents. The long and slow process of psychological and social development of the child is called socialization. Keep in mind, let me to repeat, the long and slow process of psychological and social development of the child is called socialization. Man is often described as a social animal. One very obvious reason for this is that human beings usually live together in families and wider communities. But this is not always true. Remember here that in the folklore of most communities there are important characters who are wanderers and hermits and outcasts. The more important and interesting aspect of man's social nature is related to how it is formed. An individual's personality and behavior patterns are determined to a large extent by the culture in which his or her early socialization took place. The human infant is born with the potential for developing in a vast number of different ways. The culture into which he or she is born functions as an environment which provides the opportunity and support for learning various things associated with being a person and member of society. At the same time, it restricts what is learned by the child. Thus, the language the child is exposed to in the home and neighborhood becomes the first language, and the culture of that particular community is what the child learns and accepts as his or her own. Thus, the language and culture of the community in which socialization takes place influences the social nature and identity of the individual in important ways. A child has very little choice in these matters. It is only after we have become socialized and learned how to live in society that we can begin to rebel or become reformers. A remarkable feature of the process of learning the first language is that it occurs quite naturally and is managed with a high level of effectiveness. This strikes us as truly amazing when we note that this learning of language takes place without any conscious planning and effort going into teaching it. Various persons around the child, both adults and other children, help and support this first language acquisition process, but there is no systematic teaching. We can state another principle now. Every child learns to speak his or her first language quite effectively, even without planned and organized teaching. This is very important what we are experiencing in our society. Of course, after the child goes to school, a great deal more learning takes place under instruction, especially reading and writing. But this curriculum based teaching is based on what was learned earlier through the natural process of socialization. We should also remember here that not everyone goes to school, and of those who do start, quite a few do not stay there more than a few years. Even so, such persons with little or no schooling are quite effective users of the spoken form of their first language. It is worth noting here that in many societies, and this is especially true of all parts of India, children grow up in communities where more than one language is commonly spoken. So this we have seen and in and around society and in and around our location of the resident here we are residing in the community. Now let us see different contexts and settings for human learning. The total process of socialization, as mentioned in the previous my discussion, as we have noted in the previous discussion, is very long, drawn out, and slow, and it covers a complex and comprehensive set of activities. Through these activities, the culture of the society, customs, values, attitudes, languages, folklore, knowledge, and skills, technology, etc., is passed. I mean, etc. Technology, etc., is passed onto each new generations. These ongoing and naturally occurring activities from the various corner of the community form the most common context for human learning. Children are involved in these activities, but many of them are not specially designed for children, young children, and teenagers, especially, and adults all take part. These largely informal social activities can be contrasted with the more planned and organized operations associated with schooling or formal education. Schooling, especially because it is spread out over many years, is of course a part of the broader process of socialization. The overall purpose and effect of both are virtually the same, but the organized and consciously implemented activities of schooling can be placed in a separate category because of certain special characteristics they have. One obvious feature of schooling is that a few specially designated persons functions as teachers. The two and the children, I mean learners, go to specially set up places called the classroom where teaching learning is expected to take place. In the context of school, children have a special opportunity to learn. They are expected to pay attention and be serious and try hard and so on. This school related image of the child is indicated by the term pupil. This is a useful label and we shall use it here to distinguish between two roles that children usually have. They are always learners in general because they are involved in the process of socialization. A second important aspect of schooling is that only some specific type of knowledge and skill are covered in the program of instruction followed there. These selected areas constitute the curriculum. Certain other types of activity are treated as extracurricular. As we all know, quite often these are the things that children find more meaningful and interesting than what is in the curriculum or portions to be covered. The formality of schooling requires that what is in the syllabus timetable has to be done on a given day, not what seems more interesting and enjoyable for the pupils. And then there are many things which are always treated as outside the classroom of the school. Learning in these areas is taken care of by the agencies of socialization or special school-like institutions. Schools and colleges, especially their classroom and laboratories, represent a very highly structured formal context for learning. There are other contexts where the degree of organization and formality is lower. We find these in the extracurricular activities of school and in similar activities related to the home and neighborhood. Some examples are sports and games, culture programs, guides and scouts activities, excursions, visits to museums and exhibitions. These activities are seen as broadly educative. There is the hope that children will benefit, learn in various ways, but there is not a deliberate plan to teach and test following a syllabus as in the classroom setting. Further, these activities are not compulsory. Children's interests are taken into account. And next, there is a third type of context we are all familiar with, where there is conscious effort to learn and something we would call instruction is taking place. But the arrangements are highly informal. A family friend functioning as a music teacher or sports coach or driving instructor would come under this category. What is significant is that someone with more skill or knowledge is trying consciously to help and guide a learner with the less ability initially to gain more of it. With the cooperation of this learner, an older child trying to teach a younger one how to fly a kite or ride a bicycle or to play cards would be good examples of this type of highly informal but purposeful and effortful setting for learning. The individual practicing something means in the sense cycling, singing, reciting, or doing homework or revising for a test is also learning in this informal but planned and serious manner. So, all these contexts and settings in which learning takes place are very important, and what is of interest is that learning seems to occur quite successfully in all of them. We have another principle to record now. Human learning takes place in a wide variety of ways, making fine distinctions between schooling and socialization or between formal and informal settings is not of any importance in itself. This is very important. And next one, the versatility of the human learner, the crucial role of learning in development. Let us see one of the points that came up in our earlier discussion that the child is born with potential. The environment representing opportunity to learn plays an important role in determining how this potential is fulfilled. The best example of this is how the linguistic environment of the child determines which one comes to play the role of the first language. It is possible to respond to this pessimistically by saying that we are victims of fate and that there is no real human freedom. But surely the more interesting and exciting principle we find here is that human nature is highly plastic and adaptable and not predetermined as is the case with animals. Most animal behavior is instinctive or biologically predetermined. All members of species will show the same pattern of behavior if development has been what that is normal. For human beings, on the other hand, variability and individual differences in psychological and social behavior are the norm. We are born with the potential which develops in wildly differing ways for each of us. It is only at the physical and or psychological level that behavior patterns are essentially alike. Nearly all that goes into our human nature ideas, beliefs, attitudes, likes and dislikes, hopes, fears, mental and physical abilities, and so on is the result of learning in interaction with the environment. A very important point here is that the environment that helps to shape the nature of the person is not fixed. Both the physical and the social element of an individual can and does change. A young child's family can move from one linguistic community to another or from living as a small single child family to a large joint family setup or from a small village to a large impersonal urban center. The possibilities are virtually infinite and many actual changes do keep occurring. The young child especially has to be able to adjust, which means learn to new physical and social surroundings. Thus, the important principle relating to the environment and learning is that humans have a tremendous capacity to learn and keep learning. This versatility and flexibility is crucial for our survival in drastically changing environments. If we relate largely on fixed and instinctive behavior patterns, we would be unable to cope with the new surroundings by changing our behavior. This is why the plasticity of human nature is so important. It is the essential foundation on which the diversity and richness of what we call human civilization has developed. The capacity to learn the what were discussed are also very effectively applied or utilized by nearly all human beings of all changes. So next comes the learner's role in learning, personal but not fixed characteristics. So what is the role of a learner in learning a language? Two very general principles which emerge from the our earlier discussion, what we discussed a couple of seconds ago, are that human learning is very effective and that learning is based on interaction with the environment. This might lead us to think that learning is entirely managed or controlled from the outside, or in other words, that merely anything can be taught to human beings by providing the necessary teaching inputs. These inputs are the models for imitation, the illustrations and demonstrations, the explanations, etc. that the typical teacher provides to a class of pupils. But such a view of learning would be quite inaccurate. Learning is not simply a matter of absorbing what is made available as inputs like a sponge soaking up water. The learner is a key factor in determining what is learned, how it is learned, and how fast. There are various principles or laws which have been found to apply to the process of learning. Here we shall just note that various characteristics of the learner will influence what and how he or she learns in a given learning situation or when faced with a set of inputs. Every teacher finds out very soon that this is true. When something is taught or presented to a class, all the pupils do not take it in or learn it in the same way or to a same extent. The nature of the individual pupil seems to be an important factor. Another general fact about learning is that what is learned is not quite the same as what is taught. Thus, learning is strongly influenced by the unique individual characteristics of the learner. This applies both to informal learning and to formal learning. These implications of this learner factor is that we cannot understand the process of learning without a fairly adequate picture of the individual learner. In other words, we cannot hope to make planned instruction very effective if we do not match it with the pupil's capacity to cope with the new item of learning and his or her respectivity to it. We shall use the term readiness for specific new learning here to denote this combination of ability and attitude that the learner brings to each new learning situation. Judging the readiness of pupils with their sensitivity and tailoring instruction to fit well with it constitutes the central challenge in syllabus construction and in teaching. A very important feature of this learner factor is that it is based on the very large stone, a very large, it's a big task to be stored or reserve of learned abilities and attitudes and interests that every learner has. We are not dealing here with the general and stable characteristics of individuals that we are more familiar with, such as body build, general health, and mental ability. These characteristics do affect the learning, but only in a general and predictable way. Our concern here is that not these features, but knowledge, abilities, attitudes, and interests that have developed and continue to be developed as a result of exposure to the environment and the learning this generates. The large and constantly expanding store of such items represent a learner's special resources or needs for new learning in particular areas. Now, sometimes it is easy to see that this can happen in relation to a wide range of areas in which there is learning requirement. Thus, we can think in terms of a large variety of possible specific readiness. The store or reservoir of abilities and attitudes, which is the basis of readiness, built up slowly and steadily as exposure to the environment leads to learning. Its size and richness is not linked to general characteristics like intelligence in any important way. In fact, the resource represented by readiness can help a learner be quite successful in learning, at least in some areas, even when his or her general progress at studies is not very good. A word of caution is necessary here. The learner's past experiences will not necessarily be an advantage in every case. Sometimes there may be nothing that is of any special help to make a given item easier to learn. Sometimes the individual's background might even be a disadvantage. This happens when an individual lacks some specific item to knowledge or skill which individuals of that age or in that class are assumed to have. Clearly, This is a matter of chance to a large extent as it is exposure or opportunity to learn that is the case of the deficiency. If an individual does not know something, many others happen to know. This cannot be treated as a reliable indication of his or her being unintelligent or a poor learner. There is a second way in which the learner's background store can have a negative influence. This is through the development of a negative attitude towards certain activities or topics as a result of unhappy earlier experiences. Many of us would know of cases where individuals' interest in something has been killed by an uninspiring or unsensitive teacher, perhaps even a harsh and new one. The general principle here too is that the individual's personal pattern of learned knowledge and attitudes can affect future learning. On the whole, however, we can say that the variety of specific elements that go into the store of resources of each individual is more helpful and advantageous than harmful as a factor in the learning process. It is personal, but it is only marginally related to stable qualities like intelligence and personality type. What matters? That's very important. What matters most as far as effect on learning is concerned is the wide range of items, abilities, and attitudes that have been learned. This influence of past learning on new learning is a principle that helps us to understand why human learners are so versatile. An important consequence of this is that an individual's learning pattern is highly personalized, but it is also dynamic as the resources for learning are constantly developing. So these are very important aspect as a new learner. The learner should know uh, what and how the society plays and what is the main casual factor for his learning the new language. We have also seen that learning is a highly individualized process. Each person's unique learning history has a strong influence on what and how he or she learns from a given situation. The notion of readiness for new learning in a specific area is relevant here. A critical feature of readiness in this sense is that it is the result of learning and so is constantly changing and developing. And even a more important consequence of changing readiness is that the same person may function differently as a learner in different situations and as time passes. A pupil's status as a good or poor learner is therefore not fixed and generally applicable. For each new occasion for learning, the individual starts with a fresh combination of knowledge, skill, and attitude that can make the levels of involvement and success quite different from those of other occasions. We should not prejudge a people's learning capacity on the basis of his or her past record or what is more common, reputation. A people who has been weak in some subject area did not remain that why or in another way of always. As new topics are taken up, the value of that people's readiness might change significantly and there could be a spurt of successful learning. So this might seem to be bad news as far as effective syllabus design goes. However, the main point emerging out of this, what we discussed so far, is that the capacity to learn languages that human beings of all ages have is something truly remarkable, and this is put to good use even when there is no teaching to support it. We have not come to any definite answers to our who questions, but we have a sense of the capabilities of learners of language in general, even while recognizing their individuality. Hope you have understood the environment, the society, the language, and readiness, and how person involves in learning a new language, and how society involves, and how the community influences on, and how interaction takes place between the two individuals, and how the individual responds to the new situation. Hope you all understood this CT, uh, the first, that is a CT01, in that how and who are the language learners, and how society and community influences on him, and what are the personality characteristics, how though the characters are not fixed, how these characters influence on learning new language. Uh, Please keep in mind all these things. And lastly, uh, maintain a social distance, wear the mask, and let us fight against uh, the COVID 19 uh, pandemic issue, and as well as the mutation of this COVID 19, what we are seeing nowadays in the society. Thank you. Thank you, Nal.